Hey everybody, the husband here. This episode is going to just end abruptly because we ran out of hard drive space. She and Taylor will finish up their conversation next week. That being said, I thought I'd like to take this opportunity to let you know that the Low Value Female Podcast has a Patreon at patreon.com/Low Value Female Podcast. Help us buy a new hard drive and stop these disruptions in the future. Thank you.
Well, Taylor, thank you so much for bringing back. This is going to be a real special episode.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Because today we're going to be talking about porn.
Oh, boy.
Specifically pornography. So we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to start from where Andrea Dworkin, and a lot of this is going to be inspired from Andrea Dworkin's, in her book, Men Possessing Women, Pornography, Men Possessing Women. We're going to start where Andrea Dworkin starts. So this is what she says. The word pornography, derived from the ancient Greek porne and graphos, means writing about whores. Porne means whore, specifically and exclusively the lowest class of whore, which in ancient Greece was the brothel slut available to all male citizens. The word pornography does not have any other meaning. The graphic depiction of the lowest whores. Whores exist to serve men sexually. Whores exist only within a framework of male sexual dominance. Indeed, outside the framework, the notion of whores would be absurd, and the usage of women as whores would be impossible. The word whore is incomprehensible unless one is immersed in the lexicon of male domination. Men have created the group, the type, the concept, the epitaph, the insult, the industry, the trade, the commodity, the reality of women as whore. Women as whore exist within the objective and real system of male sexual domination. The pornography itself is objective and real and central to the male sexual system. The evaluation of women sexually in pornography is objective and real because women are so regarded and so valued.
Jeez, Andrea, you're going to get canceled. They're called sex workers nowadays.
So I wanted to when I first read that, it's very tempting for me to kind of look at that writing and go, that's not what that really means, right? What does actual pornography, the word, the etymology, the usage of that word in ancient Greece look like? And I was a little surprised to find that she was not off, really.
Yeah, totally.
So, the word in the English language appeared in, 1842. And it is ancient obscene painting, especially in temples of Bacchus. And then depicting prostitutes or to rites. So prostitute in ancient Greece wasn't just porne. It also has a connotation. It originally meant to sell or to traffic in. And the way that we get dirty words, we never talk about things directly, right? It's always a euphemism. So it was probably to sell or to hawk goods, and then just became synonymous with selling sex.
Yeah. And you're hawking it in the marketplace or whatever.
Yes. And specifically, there were times where it was seen in ancient Greece as a public good to have these porne be available to the normal, I think they were talking about Athenian men. Yeah. So like a bathhouse or anything like that, you could pay for essentially city-sponsored sex work.
It's a resource.
Yes, it is a resource. It is a resource that is available, and it was almost exclusively women who were not Athenian.
Yeah.
It was, they called them myopic or metic. And they specifically were seen as it would stop men from adulterating against their Athenian wives.
Right.
Because Athenian women were not ever sex workers. That was not something that you could do. But foreign women, absolutely, totally fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, and, I know you've been reading Debt as well, and Graeber talks about this, I'm pretty sure in there, that, our conception of Athens is, deeply wrong. Like, it was like a slave society that was like deeply competitive, and like they had to turn everything into a contest, from politics, that's where the Olympics comes from, for goodness sakes. Like, not that there's anything per se wrong with that, I guess, but like, and a society in which women were, classically like seen and not heard.
What we perceive of like Athens today is very much heavily influenced by this romanticizing that earlier scholars did. Like the first time we nicked a bunch of stuff, like the English nicked a bunch of stuff from Pompeii. They just stole it. They just outright stole it.
Yeah.
If
Well, because I'm taking a Dave Graeber class from the Membres School, so check that out, listeners. But and so we're reading a book of his essays, and he has this one called "There Never Was a West," and like, let me say it, this class has kind of lowered my opinion of him.
Yeah.
But in that, he talks about the way that democracy, the term, is a recuperation, because the founders were Republican or whatever. They were trying to base their ideas off ancient Rome. I mean, they were trying to find examples of that in their own tradition, and that's the one that they went with, was ancient Rome. And it wasn't until like the 1800s when like all these popular pressures from below caused them to have to like accede to like the democratic impulse or whatever, that we get the term democracy within the like upper echelon like literary tradition. And that's when they like did the back formation to like, oh, Athens, yeah, it's Athens is the beginning, not Rome, it's Athens.
The other thing that, like, during the time that we got all of these artifacts, the word pornography was meant specifically to shield women and children from the subject matter. Like, it was considered like a high-class thing. And in fact, after they stole all of the artifacts, Englishmen would have, English-French scholars would have these museums that were secret museums, or like secret places in their houses where they would have these pornography, and you could talk about it in front of like your wife or your kids, and like they would be shielded from the impact of the sexualization. So you would use like clever euphemisms. Like I said, we as a species have a hard time talking about sex directly.
I don't know as a species, certainly as a society, but it's like how there was sections of of Pompeii that were like not walled off, but like, roped off until pretty recently, and women and children were not allowed to go in there.
No, because obviously women cannot, like, they're too sensitive to see these penises. So there are a lot of penises. Do you know like what, like in Pompeii, what those penises, they're like for the god, was it Fascises, where we get fascinating from?
Oh.
And it was to cure the evil eye.
Oh, I thought they were like arrows pointing to the sex work district.
Both.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's how you get rid of the evil eye, apparently.
Oh, okay, by
fucking.
I mean, convenient.
It does feel a little like, they had the distinction between the porne, and then you had the hetera.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
So the hetera are the high-value women of the day. They're female companions. They're more associated with, like, geishas, right? You could elevate a porne to a hetera just by giving her a very expensive gift. And again, most of these women were not Athenian. They were not of, like, the city-state that they lived in, because those women had to be wives and go bear more Athenian children. But there's a lot of instances where heteras are considered like philosophically like equal to the great thinkers of the time. They would be sought for, like, more famous ones were sought after as counsel.
Yeah.
And so you could see these like women being in my mind, they are very much the high value females that we still kind of embody today, where there is a distinction between the low value females and there is a distinction between the high value females. And the high value females are treated with respect. They're considered, like, in a lot of ways, the intellectual equals to men, whereas the ones, the porne, the whores, and all of those, the coloners, they are really nothing more than property to be used, like common property to be used. Usually the women who were of the porne class would be slaves. They were sold into slavery. Some of these women, slave women, would buy their freedom and then go back into the sex trade, becoming like the madam of the house.
Oh, yeah.
And
because there's nothing that the oppressed love more than becoming the oppressor.
Yes. There was also a third class of sex workers, although to me it's not entirely clear, and the text that I've read is not entirely clear if they are in fact sex workers. They're called flute girls.
Yeah.
So flute girls seem to be ancient Greek stripper. If you wanted to put on a good party for guys, you brought a bunch of flute girls.
Okay.
And like, the expectation was that they could be prostituted out, but not necessarily. There's also like contexts where they find flute girls in where they're using them for like manual labor. And it's tedious work. And so they would bring flute girls there to play while the men are working. To like break up the tedium. And often guys would fall in love with them, of course, because they're there, they're pretty, like you do. They definitely like had to be of a certain like attractiveness. They had to at least be trying to be sexy and look good. But scholars kind of go back and forth of like how much they were used sexually. There are certainly instances of that, but it's more likely they were just seen as like, they are arm candy, they are beautiful women that you have at a party, and guys love nothing more than to just stare at gorgeous fucking women while they're talking about, I don't know, politics, the new thing they bought, whatever.
They're slaves.
They're slaves, the new slave they got. Do you know what a porcrosity is? Porncracity is? No. I didn't either. So there is, in the Catholic Church, a term called pornocracy. Yes, that's what.
Phornocracy.
Pornocracy, like a democracy, but for harlots. And it's in fact called the rule of harlot. Apparently, there was a Roman senatrix. Her name was Theodora, and she had a daughter named Marzia. And they together would take other popes out, because the pope at this point was a political position. I mean, it still is, but much more so. And there was 3 Roman families that controlled most of the area, and they were warring. And this one family that Theodora and Marzura were a part of, they were the most successful.
Wait, it's not like Empress Theodora, is it?
I have Senatrix.
I mean, I guess it's a common name.
Oh, it is. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. So there was an empress named Theodora. Yes, because when I looked up the name Theodora, several things came up. But this one was married to the guy of Tuscany.
Okay, yeah, I found her on Wikipedia.
And so a historian said this about Theodora, the senatrix. She's a shameless whore who exercised power on Roman citizenry like a man.
I mean, I feel you can find comments exactly like that on social media nowadays about powerful women.
It's war never changes. No, it's like that was what was thrown at her. And so the Catholic Church definitely like portrays both of these women as harlots, and like, calling it the rule of harlots, because they levied their power. Also, there's a lot of like scholarly work where it's basically like men were doing power grabs along with the women. All of these people, they're part of the same family. They're in it to win it, right? So why are we focusing only on the shitty behaviors of the women? The other guys were also doing a lot of really like awful things.
Well, that's legitimate.
Right. And that's kind of like, and of course, like you would expect that from the Catholic Church. Like, oh, it's because these women who were like, had some prominence and like political respect and status, that was why everything went to shit. Which is just not the case. There's like, the Catholic Church has been marked by scandal in like forever. This wasn't the first or only instance of like corruption in family and bullshit affecting the papacy. No, the Holy See.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that one chair has a hole in it that they like are supposed to feel their ball sack to make sure that they're not secretly a woman or whatever.
Oh my God, that is... I saw that on, what was that show? The Borgias?
Yeah.
With Jeremy Irons, and I was like, that's not real. It totally is. Because they were like, we're not going to get fooled again by a woman.
Yeah. Whether or not that woman Pope is actually real, up for debate, but...
Oh, Pope Joan?
Yeah, they're not kidding around. They're not going to get fooled whether or not she was real.
That's some fucking hysteria right there. That's some really fucking hysterical shit. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's patriarchy defending its boundaries, right?
Well, and it's specifically like, I cannot be, like, you have to separate yourself from a woman, because as soon as a woman, even if she acts the same, even if she does the exact same things and is like aligned with your like your virtues and like whatever, even if she does a competent job, because of her femininity, it has been corrupted. Masculinity requires not to be feminine.
Yeah.
Specifically not to be feminine. Do you know that the word pornography, the Greek word for pornography, appears like 24 times in the Bible?
No, I didn't know that.
So in the original Greek, I found this on neverthirsty.org, which is the most retarded like name for a Christian site. Never Thirsty. And it's specifically talking about like how you could stop masturbating to pornography. Never Thirsty.
Oh, yeah. No fap. That sounds about right.
It's really stupid. But by the time the Greeks were starting to write out the Bible, pornography meant any kind of like problematic behavior. So like a person was like, the word porne was translated to unchastely or fornication or immorality in general, or someone that just like sells their virtue.
Yeah.
I could very well easily rename the podcast porne or whore in Greek, because it's exactly what low-value females are. And when somebody is calling a person a low-value female, when guys are saying that to a woman, either because they're being shitty to them or that's how they genuinely feel, they're essentially calling them that. They're calling them, I don't respect you intellectually. I don't respect you, your body, your autonomy. I don't care about any of that stuff.
You should be available for me to use and throw away.
Exactly. Like, you should be grateful for the opportunity that I afford you of being useful, at least.
Yeah.
And that's why so many women get very nervous and very anxious when the term low-value female is brought up. And I'll give you an example of that. So Taylor, I went on Reddit.
Yeah?
And I asked Reddit,
Always a bad decision.
what do you think of low-value females?
Oh.
So I went to say, I posted it on two subreddits. The first one was Ask Feminists. And the second one was Ask Men. Ask Feminists, nothing. There was no replies.
Yeah.
0 replies. No one wanted to touch that subject. That was a hot potato.
Well,
and I don't blame them. I get it. I totally understand the existential threat this term poses to women. I was hoping for at least something, but I'm not going to begrudge women for not wanting to engage with a very shitty term.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, you know who did respond?
The men?
The men responded. Now, I'll say this about Ask Men. 80% of the responses were perfectly well-metered responses of like, you low value female, that's a terrible term. Nobody should call you that. That's what narrow-minded idiots say. And I think I got like 40 or 50 responses. And so yeah, 80% of them were like, that's an awful term. And I thank you guys. Thank you. Then you had the other 20%.
Yeah, well, I mean, that basically is demographically the breakdown in America, that about 75-80% of us are normal and 20% of us are ravening lunatic fascists.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. So the other 20% were men who basically, not viciously, but plainly said, a low-value female is a woman who is masculinized, has a high body count, what were some of the other ones? Narcissistic, shitty, mean, and like basically all of the traits that you would kind of expect from that.
One I saw on Twitter recently was, where's eyeliner?
What?
It was in a list among some other stuff like you just listed, but yeah.
So another thing that Reddit told me is that I'm not a philosophy podcast.
No.
I guess I'm not capital P philosophy.
Oh, well, I mean, I talk about capital P philosophers on here on a semi-regular basis, I feel.
I feel like that too, but I can, I guess, see their point.
Did they listen to it?
I have no idea. They just basically told me that. And I was like, I don't know if and I guess if you're going to get real pedantic, like, I have heard a lot of like philosophy podcasts, and they're mostly from people who are professors who work in like in that particular industry and use a sort of lexicon and, explore topics that honestly, most philosophy podcasts that like I think they are talking about are ones that just go over already covered ground.
Yeah. It's like, explain Deleuze to me.
I don't care. Like, I could go read Deleuze. What I'm much more interested in is like, kind of, again, like what I tried to say is like, well, like what Zizek does in Perverse Ideology, which is like take things from popular culture and analyze them through these lenses.
Right, yeah. That's cultural criticism.
Yeah, so I guess you could say this is a feminist cultural criticism podcast from the perspective of the porn.
Yeah. Well, and it brings up something that I've been thinking about a lot lately because of taking this class at the Membray School. Because what they talk about, Marx and all are very concerned about value, but Colin Drum, the guy who's in charge of it, very controversial, but always getting Marxists mad at him on Twitter. But he went back and reread the early economic literature, because he says,
oh, Adam Smith shit?
Well, Adam Smith, and more importantly, like, what do I want to say? Somebody petty. It was like, what's his name? Thomas Hobbes' secretary, who went on to like write a lot about this, and a French guy called Cantillon, and in his opinion, value is not a coherent or like well-posed category. It's like because both of them were the first ones to use the term value, and they're using it as like a rationalization for a political argument. Like, so basically all value theories are just they're making a political argument. They're like, and so you see where I'm going with this, that like the idea of a low value female like encodes a cultural politics that is attempting to like instantiate like, we're judging you as low value because politically we are afraid of the advance of feminism and what have you, like, and we're trying to roll that back.
Yes, the idea of like, yes, like we want to like make that separation between people that could potentially like take the elite out of the game. Andrea Dworkin talks about the masculine in our culture, like the masculine being stronger than the feminine as like a right to rule doesn't apply when you're talking about Black guys.
Right.
Like, oh, well, now it's because we're so much more rational and we have like God on our side to tell us that we can rule over these people.
Because ultimately, it's a slave system.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's one that requires like we have to keep finding resources and people to exploit because that's the only way that we can keep this kind of system running. And as we're like seeing now, once you like, we were fine with elevating women and like giving them jobs and letting them in the workforce when we could pay them less and it was culturally acceptable. We were fine with that. That's where we got a lot of the boom. But now we're getting to a point where they've been in the field for a couple of decades. Now they're like getting seniority and they're still like being pushed down. And now we see like this rise of like contract work and this greater separation. It's like the men at the top like watched as like the women like started climbing up and they're like, ooh, we gotta push them back down.
Like how in to use a cheap example, in the Barbie movie, all of the CEOs and like executive staff, the C-suite, I believe they call them these days, of Mattel are men.
And it doesn't make any sense. And like most of in the fashion industry, 80% women work in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
And like 5% in leadership are women. So
it's gracious.
So like when you there's this concept called the glass elevator. There's the glass ceiling, then there's glass elevator for men. So when men enter into a female-dominated workforce, they get elevated to a status because it's like, oh, well, you naturally know more than we do.
About our own thing.
Yeah, I was actually doing like some research on like clothing during the time when women primarily made the clothes at home. Things like lace work was done exclusively by women, and it was a great way for women to have money without their husbands. Then they got into manufacturing, and now it's just men that work in these industries.
Well, then I saw something similar about like bustles, I think, like how it's like actually designed to obscure your figure so that men won't be lecherous towards you.
There's that, and it was also like to take up space because the worst thing you wanted was guys to sit next to you. You didn't want to get crowded out. You didn't want to get like shoved around. So having a lot of like stuff that's like fluffed out, it gave you like space, and it also made you visible. Because like one of the things that you weren't supposed to be was visible. You were supposed to just be at home, hidden away from society. And women wanted to be a part of society, and so have always wanted to be part of society and have always found ways to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, just like in Athens.
Just like in Athens, we find ways to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of the ways that women have found success is by doing the same thing men do and making a crowbar separation between the good women and the bad women, the lower women, those women that, you know what, you do whatever you want with them. You can, all of that anger and like frustration and like violence you can do to these women because that'll mean that I'm safe.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the difference between empowerment and liberation, right?
Yeah.
We empower someone within the system as opposed to liberating from the system.
It's why I hate pick-me girls. I hate all pick-me girls.
Who does it?
But pick-me girls are begging to be enslaved and are willing to pay for it by throwing the lower women under the fucking bus. They will literally throw women to the wolves if that will give them a status among the men they seek validation from. And to me, that is the most disgusting thing you can do as a person. I call pick-me girls gender traitors. Oh, another thing about the Theodora, her daughter Mazoa became the mistress of Pope Sergius III when she was just 15 years old.
Oh.
Now, I try to look up, when, was that a normal age for women? It seems like yes. To me, that's very shocking. But the age of marriage legally was 12.
I mean, in, Tennessee, they want to go back there.
I know. I do not understand that. And no, it's no. So the first wave of age of consent laws in the United States, I think that was during the 1920s. And that was specifically a women's movement. Because they wanted to stop exactly that. Stop little girls from getting married off just because their parents thought it was a good idea. No, your parents can't sell you into sexual slavery. No.
It still happens.
It does still happen, but we need to make it harder. We need to, at least stop some of it, try our best to stop some of it. Yes, and then because what you want is a girl that doesn't know any better.
Exactly.
I told you about this.
Get her before her critical thinking forms.
I told you about this. I have this fucking document about all of the positive portrayals of pedophiles throughout history. And one of the things that they said in Athens, it was done by a goddamn, it came from Meleager of Gardenia and during the 1st century. And there apparently was a very common motif of the first sprouting of anal hairs on a young boy when he is no longer suitable for boy love and is now it was also a metaphor for his intellectual development. And I'm that is hands down the most disgusting thing I've ever read. So not only is it now is he too smart to fuck?
I mean, he's too smart to get fucked.
Well, and that was another thing that they depicted. So there was a dialogue between these two thinkers that was talking about Eros being the love of the boy love, and then I can't remember the Apollodos which is love of women, representing the love of women. And one of them said, I love women because I like having sex with people that want to have sex with me, not something that is clearly foisted upon them, something that is done to them. And the other guy's yeah, but, and I'm wait a minute, yeah, but
my
penis, my penis demands
my femboy.
Yeah, it's this idea that you want to get them before they have the ability to think for themselves, what they call the obedient stage, right? Where you can just kind of mold their personality and their worldview and hopefully make them into whatever you want. The problem a lot of times comes from the fact that people that are attracted to the more immature, once that object of desire is no longer immature but has matured and grown up, they find them disgusting.
Well, that's why you start abusing your daughters.
This seems like a bad idea, and I don't really know why. There was a movie about an artist, Alexander Skarsgård starred in it, and it was about a guy who, I think this was early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and it was a single mother and her teenage daughter. And he starts like going out with the mother as the boyfriend, and then moves in and then starts having an affair with the daughter.
Yeah.
And when she's like 15. And the artist like that was the subject of this movie was based on her real life and how her mother's boyfriend took advantage of her. She later, like 30 years later, like contacted him and was like, hey, this movie is coming out. I just wanted to let you know that it's about you. And he's like, yeah, I heard about it. I showed my friend, and it's like, isn't that a real man?
Exactly.
Decades later, he's like, yeah, no, that was a great idea. Fucking the 15-year-old daughter and the mother. Sweet.
Well, that's because, you know, the origin of the term patriarch is like the Roman householder, you know, who like was a slave owner, you know, and women were, you know, not at least much higher status than slaves, and certainly female children weren't either. So you have a right to use and dispose of your women and children as you see fit.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I really like, so the heteras for me are just the pick-me girls. And like when you create a system where you basically make people fight for scraps, then you're going to have women who game the system and go, okay, well then I'll do whatever it takes.
Well, I'm going to read a quick selection from one of my favorite philosophy books, Anti-Oedipus, which I think...
Oh, it's a good book.
Yeah. Okay. So, that is why the fundamental problem of political philosophy is still precisely the one that Spinoza saw so clearly and that Wilhelm Reich rediscovered. Why do men fight for their servitude as stubbornly as though it were their salvation? How can people possibly reach the point of shouting, more taxes, less bread? As Reich remarks, the astonishing thing is not that some people steal or that others occasionally go out on strike, but rather that all those who are starving do not steal as a regular practice, and all those who are exploited are not continuously out on strike. After centuries of exploitation, why do people still tolerate being humiliated and enslaved, to such a point, indeed, that they actually want humiliation and slavery, not only for others, but for themselves? Reich is at his profoundest as a thinker when he refuses to accept ignorance or illusion on the part of the masses as an explanation for fascism, and demands an explanation that will take their desires into account. An explanation formulated in terms of desire. No, the masses were not innocent dupes. At a certain point, under a certain set of conditions, they wanted fascism, and it is this perversion of the desire of the masses that needs to be accounted for.
Yeah, we are seeing that today, where when things get economically tight because certain people have made terrible, fucking awful decisions, when people like Elon Musk have ran companies into the ground through their egotistical, drug-fueled bullshit, then a lot of people are like, I just want to feel secure. I just need a consistent thing. Like, I can understand why you can have a distaste for liberalism when it feels like, look, if you don't have any good choices, if you're choosing from shit, I would rather just be told this is what you get.
Right.
I don't want to have to go through the process of, like, that's a lot of cognitive, like, resources that you have to go through. When you have what we have now, yeah, people fucking love trad wife content. They want a single breadwinner, America, and we can have that, but we have to allow women to be the breadwinners. And like got to that point where Americans could live off of, you know, one person, the mother, the father, whoever, to do that, we would have a better, probably more egalitarian society. People would feel better about things. People would like be able to make choices not based on fear and like desperation, but actually on like what choices they prefer.
Well, the problem is that doing evil feels good.
I mean, we could do evil. Like, there are a lot of ways we could do evil. And if you want to try to, like, put it in a better system, I think that we could definitely do that.
I guess what I mean is, like, well, I call it fascist jouissance.
It does feel so good.
Yeah, hurting other people is exciting.
It's exciting, and like, when you feel guilty about it is when you are the most caught in it. Like, oh, I feel so bad that I'm such a piece of shit. And since I'm such a piece of shit, I better go do that again.
Yeah, I'm not going to stop.
I'm not going to stop doing it because I'm a piece of shit.
Right.
That's like, well, what if you weren't a piece of shit and you were like a moral and good person? No.
Like an abusive dad who, like, doesn't apologize, just starts self-hating. Oh, I'm the worst. I can't believe it. Like, okay, so cut it the fuck out.
No.
But no.
God, no. So Dorgan talks about the first tenet of male supremacist ideology is that men have this self and that women must, by definition, lack it. And that is true. She goes on to talk about, like, men's rights basically come from their penis. The second tenet of male supremacy is that men are physically stronger than women, and for that reason have domination over them. So you see, like, how this concept of, like, physical strength as power is not contingent on them actually being stronger.
Right.
So you can say that most men are stronger than most women, but I was definitely stronger than my ex-husband.
Yeah, everyone knows muscle mommies exist.
They absolutely do, and just because most doesn't mean all, and there's that overlap, and that doesn't, like, does that make them less of women? Or does that make them more masculine? Or can we just separate masculine and feminine from physical strength? But of course, once you start pulling on that thread, then you start, like, realizing masculine and feminine is just kind of like these arbitrary, like, things that we make up.
One is the other.
One is the other. And so I'm also really getting down on choice feminism.
Hell yeah.
What do you mean choice? Because when you're in a system that's like, we only want this kind of women, like, only these kind of women can have a choice if you're, like, a consumer, etc., etc. It was reading Vibrator Nation in talking about, and this is, like, a very choice feminist fucking book, but they talk about the after the pharmaceutical companies invested the pill because they saw the dollar signs, and the Supreme Court handed down decisions in the 1950s and 60s that redefined obscenity in large part because the market demand for sexual materials was so high. So because of, like, our redefining of obscenities, because of the choice, women now had to delay pregnancy, so now they can work like men, right? And that to me doesn't sound like a great choice. It's like, okay, so you either have the choice of getting on the pill and working like a dog like men. So you will basically, if you do have kids, it will be because you married another guy in the industry that makes more money than you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, again, the empowerment versus liberation thing. Like, you can work within the system because you failed to overthrow it. I mean, that's sort of the same as, like, why the hippies, became all mystical after 1969 because they failed. It's same sort of process. And I mean, you can actually see that happening, that choice feminism grew out of cultural feminism, the whole, like, mother goddess ethos, like, there's something essential and, like, spiritual about femininity itself, and that didn't arise until after the defeat of the New Left.
I mean, and, like, the spiritual essentialism of that is just a mirror reflection of the spiritual essentialism of maleness.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's just covert complementarianism.
Right. And that's why they were overwhelmingly white.
The lady who wrote The Transsexual Empire, Janice Raymond.
Oh, you know what? I think that'll be a good topic for soon. I don't know if it'll be next time, but I definitely want to get through that because I hate TERFs. And in fact, I want them to die so much.
Yeah, I mean,
like, this is what I hate about TERFs. They are the perfect example of these stupid high-value women who think, if I do the dirty work of getting rid of all this riffraff to make daddy happy, then maybe daddy won't hurt me. No, the leopards will eat your face. You are going to be on the menu if they run out of low-value females to fuck with.
Yeah, you're a low-value female, too. You're a feminist. That makes you a low-value female. We're going to be in the same prison camp, bitch. Yes. So I'll see you there.
Exactly. You're not going to save yourself anything by literally sleeping with the enemy.